Hello, everyone. I am Monica Grable, Arts Education Director at the Montana Arts Council, and I'm happy to welcome you to this third in our series of conversations with Montana poets, a part of our Poetry Elevated program this year, which is a new original writing opportunity for high school students. And we'll give a little bit more of the particulars and how to submit and those kinds of things toward the end of this session. But we are very happy to have, first of all, Kaisa Edie, our Poetry Out Loud Outreach Coordinator this year, leading this great conversation that we're about to have, and two friends of Poetry Out Loud for sure. Two poets in Montana that I rely on regularly, and who have been so gracious in supporting this program. So today we have Tami Haaland, a once and always poet laureate for Montana from 2013 to 2015. I'm hoping I'm remembering those dates right. And also creative writing professor at Montana State University Billings. And also, Tami serves as the Dean of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Did I get that right? Great. And I'm going to ask each of them to talk just a little bit about their work, their published works, and also what they're working on now. Um, and we have Sean Hill with us, also creative writing professor from the University of Montana, who has a forthcoming book project I know he'll talk about. And Sean has played a number of different roles since I first asked him to be a guest poet
Yeah.
poet in my back pocket, I called him, I think, during one of our state finals events, and we've continued that tradition since of having a guest poet who is not judging but is sharing work throughout the event. So that was really fun to get to know Sean Hill back then, and since he's involved some of his graduate students in our program. So, welcome to you both. Thank you for being here with Kaisa and me. And Tami, can you just go ahead and just give us a little a little bit of information about your published works and anything else you want to tell us about what you're working on now?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. Sean and I had the good fortune to read together earlier this year. Well, last year, I guess. But so it's really great to be here. Thank you. Um, so I have four collections of poetry. The most recent is If I Had Said Beauty. It looks like this. It's got kind of a autumn-like flowery cover that is actually a photograph. It looks like a painting, but and they've come out over the years. So this came out last March, and is my most recent work. And then at the same time, this beautiful six poem collection came out from Bear Scratch Press at University of Montana, called Bright Flower, and it was just a really such a joy to see how that evolved. I felt very lucky about that. What I'm working on now is really more poetry. I've written a couple of essays that have just been, requests, and but mostly I'm still very much working in poetry, and I would say I'm maybe a third of the way through another collection. It takes time.
Yeah. Yes, it is a great honor to be here today in company with Tammy and uh, Monica and Kaisa. Um, I am a poet from Georgia originally. I have two collections that are already out published, Blood Ties and Brown Liquor and Dangerous Goods. And a third one that's on the way. The book cover is there. It's titled "The Negroes Send Their Love." And the Negroes and Their Love is sort of me expanding a little bit. So there's poetry in there, and there's short fiction, and there's some essays, some nonfiction. And I think my next project is gonna be um, prose for the at least what is engaging me most right now is this idea that I will write a novella. Um, yeah, so I'm working on a short novel, maybe, and we'll see how that goes. Um, yeah, and it's been like great over the years working with you, Monica, with Poetry Out Loud, and sort of finding a way to contribute or allowing my grad students to contribute. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
so great to have you both involved in this program in various ways. Tammy's also been a host several times, at least at this point, for a regional event. And we'll just use that opportunity to put the plug out. We certainly wish we could get some more Billings area schools involved in Poetry Out Loud. So um, let us know if you would like to jump in next year. Um, Kaisa, go ahead and um, start us off talking about maybe the other workshops first, and then we can jump into the theme of the day.
Yeah. So, our workshop series for Poetry Elevated, this is number three, and will be our final one that we have planned so far. And these workshops sort of just give us a chance to slow down a little bit, and pay closer attention to how poets write and use language, to the lived experience, and to one another as writers. The first workshop that we did with Alan Morris Jones and Aaron Parrott really revolved around sound and revision and how we sort of craft a poem based on the ear. The second workshop that we did was with Lowell Yeager, and a lot of what we talked about with that workshop was how we notice things or what calls us to write about it, what grabs our attention, and how do we sort of translate everyday beauty to the page. Um, I think for me, the great thing about these workshops and Poetry Elevated for high school students is that the goal isn't to have a question and an answer to any sort of one theme. It's more of the willingness to have working writers sit down with students and talk about more complex themes and sort of come up with honest questions and answers together. So between voice and revision and inspiration and beauty, those things really, I think, are pertinent not just to high school students, but writers and readers of all ages. And the thing I thought that might be sort of a nice jumping off point today, is sort of how we might consider both representation and responsibility, as writers when we sit down to write. And that might be how we see ourselves or we don't see ourselves in the things that we're reading, but also sort of how our identities shape our own work and how we see ourselves reflected in literary spaces. I think, I guess, uh, a neater version of that would be how do you sort of carry or resist the pressure to represent something more than yourself? So you have your lived experience, but your work is going out into the world. And I guess how we navigate those things, how we share those things, how we experience something personally and then on the page. So if any of that interests you, I thought that might be sort of uh, a broadish way to enter into the conversation. So.
Um, I'll just jump in. Like all of that interests me. And I'm thinking about our reading together, Tammy. Um, you were reading part of your reading is about ancestry, right? You were reading
Hmm.
poems like
Yeah.
considering and I was so backstory for everyone who's watching this. We read at an event called A Flight of Writers that they put on here at the Montana Book Company in Helena, and
Hmm.
it pairs writers with beverages, and there are usually three writers, and so I was reading with I got to read with Tammy Holland and Charles Finn, and it was wonderful, incredible. And also, I was the last reader, so I had to figure out what I was going to do in part. Like, how do I make my reading kind of fit with their reading. And it felt kind of natural because like, I'm writing about ancestors and I'm like, I'm writing about
Yeah.
an identity. And I'm like, I'm doing the same thing. And I think Charles was too in his fashion. Um, like what you said about Lowell's noticing the natural world or noticing the world around him and how to get that on the page. Like that's a lot of what Charles's work is about, right? And that is also a way of identifying, like how do you see yourself fitting in the world? Anyway, your work aligned more with my work because I do think about identity in sort of ancestral and societal ways. Um, and it, I have this epigraph from my first book. It's a James Baldwin quote. That I think we probably could use as a header for what we do, Tammy. The responsibility of a writer is to excavate the experience of the people who produced him or her, right? So I think that's a big part of like how I'm engaged. I'm thinking about those. It's particularly in this first book, and now I'm sort of broadening out in my latest um, book, latest endeavor, and thinking about how we are seen and what those identities that are placed upon us are, and also um, how we identify ourselves, right? And I did this thing that night that was totally inspired by your reading, Tammy. Uh, and where I was like, let's think about identity, audience, because I have to engage people when I'm doing these things, right? Like, hey, let's think about identity. And and I said, how many of you in this audience identify as Hellenans? Because that's where we are. And then I just kind of bumped identity out by orders of magnitude, just to sort of get people to see like where they can find commonality, right? The last question I asked is, how many of you identify as Earthlings? And there were most of the hands went up in the audience, which I thought was wonderfully funny. Um, so there were some aliens in the room, but that's okay too. Um, yeah. And so art broadly and poetry in particular, um, it's about exploring the human condition. And we all, I think, can say we're humans, and then we have to figure out like what is this this way that you're particularly living and experiencing being a human. That's where the art comes from, engaging with that question. And maybe not coming up with an answer, that's fine. But like just engaging, reporting, sharing, like how it is that you are a human. Um, I there's I got to teach world lit a couple semesters when I was in Alaska, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Let's look at this anthology, and they had these love poems, these Egyptian love poems, and I keep thinking about that. I was like, ancient Egyptians wrote love poems. We're still writing love poems. We still have songs about like love, and reading those love poems is basically the same thing. Just the context is a little different. It's just like, hey, girl, you looking cute over there. I saw you washing clothes down by the river. Um, you know, and I was like, that's basically the same thing. Hey, girl, you're looking cute. I saw you doing this thing. You're looking real cute. Or guy, right? So this way of engaging the human experience is part of our art making as a species. Um, the way you identify, the way I identify, um, informs what that art is. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So yeah, go ahead. like you were going to say something.
Well, I really love your new work.
Yeah.
Um, and I love the way, you know, the breadth of that exploration. And I really think so. On the one hand, I am sometimes wary of words like identity because I think in the world of branding,
Mm,
it can get pretty thin. And I see it, and I think, I see that in your work too. It is interconnected. It is a web. It is changeable. We are dependent upon all of our ancestors, which goes back farther than we could possibly ever trace. These
yeah.
people
Yeah.
who basically shore us up and support us and allowed us to be here. And then there is that part, like, this is the self I bring to the world, which can be variable given day and time and all the rest, right? But then
Right. Right.
I think you're sort of speaking to this too, this idea that then you bring that self to the world and you try to be true to the voice inside that is trying to respond to what is out there, what it's encountering.
Yeah.
And it is I mean, I think of it as this journey, as this kind of um, complex intertwining, and then we try to serve the poem so that the poem can emerge in a way that it wants to emerge. Um, we're not just imposing our will on it. It's more like it erupts or something like that, and then we try to shape it and allow it to be in the world. So
Yeah. So
Well,
yeah.
oh, sorry, Sean. You sent me this handout yesterday, which was included in our newsletter, which I think, you know, goes along with this conversation pretty well. And you posed a question that was asked of you when you were a student of who was speaking in your poems.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea that at first you thought the question was being asked directly of you, but then, you realized that that was not necessarily the meat of the question, because the poet is speaking, but all of this history and all of the weight that the poem is carrying might not, you are just, I guess, the vessel which delivers the poem.
Right.
Um, and so I just thought it was really interesting, with some of the vernacular conversation that you were talking about, and how vernacular, I guess, can be defined in more than just, diction or language, that it can be defined by articles and things that we sort of collect, as perhaps, imagery, and how a lot of the time, even the definition of speaking something can be much broader when we're writing. And I just thought that was a very interesting point, that um, observing someone and or a thing and the things that are important to that particular subject is a language in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, and I just was wondering if maybe you, I guess, could talk a little bit about that, a little more about how, um, I guess, how the things we write about might speak or have their own history, and how we sort of, I guess, are able to show that on the page. How perhaps the history of something um, comes into being and has its own language. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, language is this technology that is developed across the world, and every culture, um, big C and little c, sort of has, developed their own kinds of languages. And that's how I'm thinking about vernacular. Like, what's the spoken language? What's the of a people? But the people can be defined um, ethnically, racially, uh, by gender, regionally, like people in a certain space, and occupation, as I say in the sort of handout. Um, and that language reflects a way of being and a way of thinking about the world, being in the world and thinking about the world, right? And so earlier I was talking about excavating those the people who produced them. Um, I think now in this new book and just sort of where I am in life, I'm thinking about preservation of language in some ways too. And that was like some of those poems I included in the handout, especially like Finna and Nem are poems that are thinking about language that as poets move into different contexts, like you come from a home with that speaks a certain way, and then you move out into the world, be it go to school or whatever, and then you have to sort of understand and communicate in a different language. Like you can't say finna anymore, right? As if you're the professor. Um, and I encountered that kind of I've encountered that in my life too. It's like, oh, I have to sort of change the code switch, change the way I speak, right?
Mhm.
Or them and them is a thing you end up not saying anymore because you're not communicating in that community. You're communicating across lines, and so that kind of work in the work of like holding on to those specific things because there's energy in those words. I think is something that draws me, and I every time I see it in someone else's work, I'm like, oh, this is incredible. Why am I not doing that? I mean, I know why because I'm doing other things, but there was this poem by the poet Danica Kelly from her latest collection, The Natural Order of Things. That I when I came across this poem in the New Yorker, I was like, oh my gosh, this is lovely, incredible, and beautiful, and it sort of inspiring. Um, I'll read it if that's okay. Just because the again, um, and then if you get this book, you'll see that this language, this vernacular, doesn't go across the book because this is a person who's moving around spaces. But the title is "Fishing in the Blood." Fishing in the blood. T baby, my mama third or fourth cousin. T baby got pretty skin and a mouth like a grave. T baby living on his cousin's land. Been taking care of my great grandma, his cousin Jewel. We standing on her front porch, me and T-Baby, and maybe I gotta tell you, we in Arkansas, that I'm 19, that I'm living with my great grandma for a minute. Maybe I gotta tell you, T, a man long grown but shiftless, that he got the same sick my mama got, drink and too much and all day, that sweet stink coming off him where we standing on the front porch. T say, if we wasn't cousins, we'd be married. He fishing in the blood that bind us. The statement slurry in the water. I say, would we? And cut my eyes to the field next door where T lived with his wife and three kids. I make a noise in my throat. I mean, I ain't ready for the grave. And I was like, that is a beautiful poem.
Mm.
Um, and I love the use of the language that she's like, we're in Arkansas, and these are my people. And like, regardless of like what's happening with this cousin who's like hitting on her, right? It's just like that capturing of the language, like, was thrilling to me. And I was like, I need to do more of that. Because as poets, and as people in the world too, we like there's so many languages that are available to us. And sometimes, like, in my first collection, I really wanted to stay grounded in Milledgeville and try to write in a certain kind of vernacular with a certain lexicon, certain vocabulary. And so I have a lot of dramatic monologues. And I was like, I'm going to write about my hometown and try to capture these voices as much as I can and talk about the history of this place in this way. And then the second book, I was like, I need to sort of break out of that and try to get back to what I had been writing, which wasn't that kind of vernacular in my poems, but the vernacular shows up in the poems. My grandmother gets to speak in some of my poems, or some of her phrases, some of her wording, um, and in the second book. And then in this third book, I'm sort of still trying to figure that out and do some of that stuff, um, because it's important, um, to try to like capture the way people speak and not just make poetic sounding things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think sometimes I think it's you're treading a for me at least, when I'm writing, it can be a very fine line of how do I capture the way someone speaks or a way a place is from an outside perspective without um, overdoing it, I guess would be the easiest way to put it. How
Mm,
do I stay true to what is being said or how it is being said, um, in the most authentic way possible without pretending that I'm um, of that place necessarily or of those people, but still honoring a certain way of being in the world. So, like, my husband's family is from Appalachia, for
mm,
example, and um, they have an entirely different language when they're together that I could not always understand at first. I had to figure out certain things that they were saying and the ways they were saying it because I was not from there.
right.
And, my husband is an academic and is very well worded most of the time. But when he gets home, an entirely different human being comes out. And he has a whole other way of speaking. Vocabulary is different and accent, everything. And so, in order to write about his family without pretending I am from there is sometimes difficult because I want to honor like their way of speaking, their traditions, because those are very ingrained with one another, but not pretending like I'm from there. Um, and
Yeah,
I
don't
think
do that.
yeah, no, the way I think to do that is to honor the things like the traditions and the items and the habits and the hard work and to I guess give um give time and space for those to stand on their own. I don't know, Tammy, if you have um particular examples in your own life or in your own writing where you want to honor or capture a way of being in the world, um, when you're looking from the outside in and how you sort of go about doing that. How do you capture the beauty of something that you might not necessarily know 100% or be a part of, but still want to capture it authentically. Do you have examples of that in your own writing that you're particularly fond of?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple of things, and I don't think it's always about capturing beauty. I think,
Hmm.
Yeah.
um, I come from the Montana Prairie, you know, I come from a really remote area on the High Line, and then south of that, and by a river, and um, so there is vernacular, there is language um, that I grew up with. There's certain mannerisms um, that I recognize as just part of the linguistic, um, fabric of that world. And so, in my first book, I have it opens with a poem about a rattlesnake. Sean, you're talking about how I like in your second book, I'm going to do this differently. And I have that problem with snakes. They keep showing up like every book. I'm like, okay, I've done that. Now I'm going to do something different. And the rattlesnakes just keep rolling in. But my first poem in that book was it starts out, it wasn't me who, oh darn it, I forget it now. It wasn't me who wanted your head cut off and buried, but once it was off, everything fell into place. Um, my brother with knife and pliers, my husband on the phone saying, save the skin, my brother with knife and pliers, me apologizing, something about rubbing salt into the skin. I can't quote it exactly. But so a teacher then said to me, well, it wasn't me, it wasn't I. And I thought, well, I can't say it that way. I mean, we don't talk that way. Um,
Right.
right. So I try to be true to the place and the people, um, and allow that to come through. But really, in that case, I'm speaking as an insider,
Mhm.
not as somebody who is coming from the outside. And so I am always, really conscious, not to presume too much from the outside. And I think for me, it really hinges on being respectful. I have a poem that I'm working on right now. Um, and I don't think I have figured out how to fully resolve uh, the situation. It has to do with an engagement with someone who um, a, a woman that I ended up giving a ride to, and she's coming from a very different place, and she's vulnerable. And how can I speak about this? Um, because I don't want to be the person that presumes what she thinks or what she knows or what her life is like. Um, So I would just say that I tend to proceed with caution. It doesn't mean, for example, that I'm not willing to tackle a historical figure. Um, and I have, I mean, I put like James Joyce into a poem and I let him speak, and Van Gogh was messing around in this poem. This is all from my first book. And I just let them do their thing. And I was maybe presumptuous, I don't know, but I think when there is a level of vulnerability, then I am really much more cautious, and I tread lightly. I'm not saying that, though, I'm not saying that I want to back away from that challenge. I'm just saying I want to make sure that I feel like there's something authentic and truthful and respectful in it.
I concur. Yeah.
Yeah.
Authentic, truthful, respectful. I also was thinking as you were talking, Kaisa, that, um, and I don't know if you were saying this, but like I feel like there's something valuable and sort of honoring and being in the outsider space.
Yes.
Like and saying and in the poem, like I'm outside of this.
Yeah.
That's that's valuable. Because the reader's outside of
Mhm.
it too. And you're like, come along with me, and not to objectify and make spectacle of someone else, but like like show the reader how to appreciate the thing you're appreciating, or if
Hmm.
for whatever it is, or whatever the feeling that the speaker's having about this thing that they're outside of, the reader needs to like be a part of that, not
Yeah,
necessarily like claim being inside of the thing. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Because my second book is basically about being an outsider in northern Minnesota. Um, you know, I think there's a poem that didn't quite make the book, but there's this way in which people there, when the people I was around at least, and that's you sort of qualifying everything, um, use the word yet as sort of this terminal like utterance in sentences, like um, the cookies have 10 minutes yet.
Oh,
Like,
yes,
like
I know that.
I was like, I did not grow up with like that. That's not how we like formed sentences. Like,
Yeah,
the cookie's still got 10 minutes to go or something like they like, but like yeah. I'm like, oh. And so that became like a poem for me, like the sort of like some like trying to figure that out. Um,
hmm.
yeah, because
I love
I
the
can't,
challenges, that
right?
there's that Robert Wrigley poem, like somebody said, don't ever write about the moon because it's a cliche. And so, of course,
Yeah,
he writes a poem about the moon. I love the challenges. Like, we should really be trying what I'm hearing from you is something about like we need to connect.
right.
We need to not be frightened away. We need to find a way to challenge ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, as as a writer, that's what engages me. Is like sort of trying to the challenge of figuring out like what am I gonna do? Like it's not the it very rarely is like the sort of burst of the first draft. Because my first drafts are hardly bursts, occasionally they are. And I'm always trying to work the thing out and also follow the sounds, follow the image and and
Mm.
build a thing. And so like revising is a big part of writing, you know. Um, and some of that revision is like changing POV and like
Yeah.
sort of understanding like because sometimes we just sort of slip into the first person. Um, and like maybe it's not a first person poem, maybe it's a third person poem or a second person poem. And seeing what that opens up, that kind of placement for the speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And maybe it's one of the things I've done sometimes when I teach dramatic monologues is to have somebody tell something that happened to them in third person.
yeah,
And it has to have some other character in it, some other person in it. And then to tell it from in first person from that other person's point of view. So
yeah,
that, yeah, um, to give voice to the person who you are not.
yeah. I like
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I hope I kind of got at some of what you're asking, Kate, Kaisa.
Yeah, yes, yes. No, it's interesting. I, I haven't been in the poetry workspace in quite a long time. And so having these conversations is really beneficial even for myself because it sort of helps my brain churn around little ideas and ways to approach writing again. And I think that's what's so nice about these workshops. It even like the point of view sort of switching that Tammy's talking about, vulnerability, the way that we sort of enter into a poem, not having to sort of be beholden to a particular story. We can stay on the outside of it while still honoring what we're writing. I think those are all really fantastic sort of ways into poems that I know that I can use. So I think that probably our teachers and our students can really learn from as well. So no, this has been fantastic in my opinion. So
I think part of what makes writing possible for me is just being out of place and being an outsider and gaining perspective, and that helps me notice things. Um, like like thinking about like there was a poem in this new collection. My mom used this word when I was growing up, progue, um,
What
which
is it?
progue.
PROG. So like that?
Yeah, yeah, something
Oh,
like that. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Um, she never spelled it right. I just said it, and I was like, "That's one spelling of it." I've seen it spelled a couple of different ways, and I was like, "I need to write a poem about this." Like probably after reading Nim or um, fishing in the blood or something. I was like, I need to go back to that language, my mom's language. And I looked it up and it's like a Scots dialect word that basically means to go foraging. But she just used it to talk about going out like on a weekend, like a day, like Saturday, like shopping and looking around. And I was like, it's Georgia, so it makes sense that these words are sort of still there, the people who settled there,
Mhm.
and the language they brought and how languages came together in that space. Um, and I was like, but no one uses that word. I think Zora Neale Hurston used it, and their eyes were watching God, or something. Or I think maybe I can't remember which word, but it's a word that's sort of out there, but it's not a word that's used very often. And I was like, I need to write about this. I need to have a poem where this word is in play. Um, and I think that's something that I think students can think about. Like, what are the words that as they've gotten out into the world? What are the words from home that they don't hear? And again, back to my sort of idea of like preserving those words. I mean, not that the words, like the poem might not be the best place to preserve a word, but it's the place I have, right? Um, and so like that's part of my project too. It's like, how do I keep this word around? And in doing that, keep my mom around, right? Um, yeah. Does that
I
make sense?
love that idea. I'm thinking of my some of the words my mom would say that I don't hear anywhere else except, maybe among her family of origin.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what, because we're talking about identity and you're talking about responsibility. I think that maybe is our responsibility, as much as excavating, it's preserving the people who
Mm.
produced us, right? Um, and yeah, I don't know. I think I'm thinking about the some of the framework you put into this conversation, Kaisa. Um, about gender and sexuality and other identities. Um, I think intersectionality, like sort of understanding how all those identities fit in your person, um, is and exploring how they all fit in your person is very important. Um, yeah,
Mhm. And how certain parts can come out at certain times. They
yeah,
they shift.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering
Monica?
if we can encourage each of our guests to share a poem of their own before we sign off today that might or might not have some relationship connection to what we've been talking about. I'll leave that up to you, but I know um, those viewing this workshop would love to hear a little something written in your voice from your voice. Um, so we can give you a couple minutes to think about it if you need that. But you've each mentioned a couple or referenced a couple um, of your poems and words that you were exploring or whatever makes sense in this moment.
Okay.
Here's a short one. I'll just read this. And this is a phrase my mother would use. She'd say she was going over home.
Mm,
So the
Mm,
poem is called Over Home. When we lived together, when my mother and father, my brother, and I still lived in our house, my mother would say she was going over home, meaning back to her parents, to their 2-story white farmhouse. Now, when I dream of it, the roof opens to sky, doors line a hallway, and rooms hold generations of treasures: stylish chairs, strange musical instruments, disorderly potential, if only someone could keep it straight.
love that.
yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic.
I'll read my mom poem too, then the prose poem. Um, Lingering. Language lingers everywhere, especially in the South, where Words from the colonial days stay alive in places like my mother's mouth. Words like the passed along British progue, meaning to go look about for something, to forage. She likely never used forage with a jewel like progue at hand, and all she meant was they, her younger sister, and she went shopping and spent much of a Saturday in the streets. My mom never got her license, so my aunt was always at her disposal to drive them in her Maxima, and before that, her Corsica, and before that, the Monte Carlo she sold me for $1 when I turned 16, because that's what family does for family. She drove them up and down the road to the mall and shopping centers to look for deals on blouses, house shoes, house coats, clothes for sons and nephews, food for the week, and whatnots. I was home one recent night in a dream looking for something I can't now remember. I just recall the looking and that my younger brother helped me look. It was good until I was struck by his being a little older than my young son, but not quite the middle school self he was when I left home for college, instead of his now edging toward middle-aged self. I told my mother about this dream the next morning at breakfast to see what she might make of it, and she talked about how the stories we tell of others mold how we recollect them later. And as she said this, I recalled my mom's recent strokes of bad health, leaving her bedbound and barely able to speak. That's when I woke heavy with past stories lingering.
Wow.
So,
I like that a
Thank you
lot.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. We'll have to pull those out for Mother's Day, I guess.
Yeah,
Put
yeah,
them out on social media or something.
yeah.
That was fantastic. This whole conversation today, I could just listen to the three of you for hours on end. I am trying to be respectful of everyone's time, but it would have been easy to just keep that conversation going. You both have so much to share. You all three have so much to share, but those listening know that about Kaisa already. And I just really want to thank you for spending this time with us and diving into this thematic conversation. And Kaisa, thank you for leading the conversation today. You always do a great job, and I just appreciate all the time and energy and thoughtfulness you're all putting to this program on behalf of students in Montana. We have never done any sort of dedicated program for original writing. Maybe not ever. Maybe quite before my time there was something, but certainly not related to poetry out loud. So this year we thought it would be a good time to just try to do something to encourage youth voices. Our high school students in the state have a lot to say. Many of them have been writing, and we want to try to honor that. So, this program that this workshop is embedded into is um, uh, our, experiment really to see if we could get some high school writers to submit a poem. We have guidelines and such, and the each student may submit one poem, um, and we have a link for that submission. So if anyone watching this is interested themselves or would like to connect us to a high school student who might be interested in submitting poetry out loud at mt.gov is the email address. And we would love to hear from you and get you all set up with the parameters and the details of that program. But we are planning to honor at least one writer, and we're going to do that during our Poetry Out Loud state finals this year. So anyone listening who's interested in what the outcome is might consider arriving at Grand Street Theater on March 7th for this year's Poetry Out Loud state finals. And we'll also be printing and sharing the winning work from this new Poetry Elevated program. So at any rate, do you have any last thoughts, any of you that you would like to share before we hop off for the evening?
Just grateful to be here, and thank you, Tammy, for that poem in the conversation, both of you. Yeah.
My thanks too. This has been a really wonderful experience, and it's so nice to be with you here. And thank you for your poem, Sean.
Thank you so much, both of you, for making time in your schedules to talk with us and supporting high school students and teachers alike in the state. We really, really appreciate your time and all of your wisdom. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully our paths will cross soon. But thank you again. I'll be in touch with each one of you soon.
Okay, take
Great.
care.
Take
Bye.
care.
Great to see you all.
Bye. Bye.